Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world, the leading global brands. Really excited about today's episode. Definitely a blast from the past, childhood nostalgia. I'm speaking with Stephanie Lunn, who's the Global People and Culture Director at the Guinness World Records. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. What's the first reaction that people give you, by the way, when you say that you work for the Guinness World Records? Just a random question.
They usually instantly become a 10-year-old and start remembering,
like I did,
childhood memories of the book and the impact it had on their childhood. So I think, to be honest, particularly in this country, because it's so iconic, people will, always remember that feeling of getting the book. And it's usually around, I can remember when I was 10 getting the book. It's usually at that sort of age, 10, 11, 12. That's our core, excited purchasers, quite frankly. The brand is huge globally, but the book is big, as in the brand and the book are big here in the UK and in some countries in Europe, like Germany and France.
Yeah.
And of course in the United States as well.
Because that's one of the interesting things, right? It transcended cultures and transcended continents.
Yeah.
It's like, everyone around the world knows. Or maybe I'm just assuming, but you see.
No, it's true. It's true, right? It's a household name. I don't think there's anybody where I say the company name so far that said, I don't know what that that company
really?
is.
Yeah.
I'm going. We're going to go and visit my father and stepmother in the summer. I've not seen them since 2019, and they live in America. Mm-hmm. So we're flying off in July, and obviously that question will come up. So it'll be interesting to see what, people's reactions are. And I'm pretty sure, Guinness World Records is equally as famous in the United States. So yeah. I'll let you know.
How many employees do you have? At the moment?
It's a really big brand, but it's actually quite a small company. So at the moment we're 178 employees. So we are in, the majority of the employees are in London.
Okay.
And then we have what we call some regional consultancies, one in Tokyo, one in Beijing, one in Dubai, and one in New York. Okay. And these offices are sort of, quite small. They're around sort of 20, 25 people. And they mainly, these consultancies deal with our client-related business. And then the London office has a publishing arm, and then also the sort of the digital arm as well as the consultancy. So the digital arm is, taking these clips and putting them onto Snapchat. And I don't know if you've been onto YouTube or Snapchat, the Guinness World Record channel, but the following is huge globally.
So I'm sure it's across all of them, like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, all
we're
of
huge.
those.
Snapchat, yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of engagement, so much so that we now have community managers or channel managers, one for each channel, because it's too much for one person to look after even two channels.
I imagine.
So we have one person looking after Snapchat, YouTube, etc., etc. So
wow. So then just what is the business model now then? Because obviously when you're younger, I'm sure it was like publication was huge, of course. I'm sure with the book. What's the model now? Just out really interesting.
So we are essentially primarily sort of three businesses. We have our publishing arm, and then we have the digital content arm, and then we have the consultancy. The consultancy is what I was talking about earlier, is the side of the business that speaks directly to business, so B2B. And the business arm is about creating records for companies. Oh. So a lot of companies do staff engagement records, or perhaps they want to do a record around their product. In New York, for example, there was a record about the most amount of ballet dancers on the street, and it was to do with the New York City Ballet. So it's about, it's related to PR and promotion.
Super
But they've all got to be properly done. So there's a department called Central Records, and these are the people who ensure that we stick to the guidelines and the rules. So you can't just have a fluffy, record that has no meaning. All these records are investigated to ensure that they're true, that they're real.
There's real science behind it then. That's because you see some pretty crazy records out there as well. So it's always interesting to understand the process. Do you have a favorite? I know it's probably a big question. Do you have a favorite like
do I have a favorite record?
Yeah, like I know it's just like is there ones that like really come to mind to you that you're like wow, like or like that you just stuck with you?
Well, I think really and truly, I think with most staff, records are close to the heart when you actually see them happen. And last year, I was lucky enough to be at the finish line at the London Marathon, which was delayed, obviously, due to COVID from 2019, and then it finally happened in October. So I was at the finish line, and we were interviewing record breakers, people who had not only run the marathon, but also, they'd done it in costume. And they'd raised thousands of pounds for charity. And so for me, that was really inspiring.
Yeah.
So it was a very meaningful record. They raised money for charity and for causes, and they'd run a marathon, and they'd done it in a sometimes really complicated costume. I had to take a picture of one lady who ran in full Spanish gear, including character shoes. So Can you imagine running a marathon in high-heeled shoes?
Wow.
Yeah. I just was in awe of her, and she looked like she just popped out to the shops to get a pint of milk. She was not even out of breath.
That's crazy.
So for me, that's what stuck in my mind.
So what's really top of mind for you now from a sort of future of work perspective, hybrid? There's so much going on right now as well.
Yeah, since 2020, I think the HR community has really been thrust into the center spotlight. We've been talking about we want to have a voice at the table for so long now, and now we do. COVID restrictions, looking after people, mental health, really big problems. And then, of course, now it's about working in a hybrid format. So we've decided as a company to embrace hybrid. And the London office, we had a break in our lease in the office, which was near Canary Wharf, really big office for space easily for around 150 people. And the break in the lease came up after 5 years, and we decided to move into town into a much, much smaller office because we thought that probably not everyone would go into the office on a daily basis. So we've moved into a building just off Tottenham Court Road. There are 25 desks, a couple of long tables. And then there's a long table in the kitchen. So I've worked out that probably we can have around 45 people max in the building, in the office at any one time. And we have a booking system to make sure it doesn't get overcrowded. So for us, we are truly hybrid. And the Americas office, we have actively recruited throughout the United States. So we've hired somebody in Minnesota. We've got a couple of people just outside California. We've got people in Florida. And we're sort of interviewing people to sit in Texas. So there's no way that anyone can go into the office. So, again, that's remote working. And the only office I think that where people are regularly going into the office 3 times a week is Beijing. And that's their culture. That's what they like to do.
Did you just leave that open to their choice to be able to do that?
Yes, it's their choice. I think we have to remember that in Beijing, most people live in very, very small apartments.
So they kind of want to get out.
They want to get out. Yeah. In fact, when they were in lockdown, they found it incredibly hard. They really, really found it very hard. Most people in the United Kingdom live in bigger apartments or bigger flats. Japan is very happy to go into the office maybe once a week. And we've just completed a glint survey. And one of the questions is anything else? And the other question is work-life balance. And with both those questions, people are saying that they're very grateful for the hybrid working, that it means that they can, they have a choice about where and how they work. That clearly it shows that we fully trust our employees. But also on a more sort of, direct experience, my team, one of the members of my team has said to me that she would really like to take her daughter to school and pick her up and take her swimming, etc. And she literally works her day around her daughter's schedule.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think that, I wish I could have done that when my daughter was that age. And I think, to be honest, kids grow up really quickly. I know you always hear this, but it is incredibly true. And the model that we had before, we spent our lives in the office away from our families, I think has had a massive impact on family life and also, our kids too.
Yeah, that
so
became
I'm
a non-negotiable
a huge
for me.
believer in this.
Yeah, with my daughter, that became a non-negotiable for me, to the point where you're seeing me right now, my daughter's nursery is 2 doors away. And I get to pick her up from nursery, drop her off from nursery, be more present. And that's now a non-negotiable. Like, I don't want to move our office back to where it was in central London, where I'm commuting an hour every day.
No.
I wake up, she's asleep. I come home, she's asleep. And I miss all of those moments that really matter, like you say.
No, I mean, I hear you. I mean, when my daughter was in primary school, she was being bullied. And it got to the point where it was, untenable for me not to be around. So I had to leave my job.
You had to choose your family, or that's so. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, you had to choose your family.
I became a consultant, and actually, there's always a good story behind a bad story. So, pulled her out of that school, got into a different school. She was extremely happy. It was her grades went from, fail to A, because she just basically was doing badly because she was being bullied. And I became a consultant for those years. And I learned a great deal by going into lots of different companies. And now I've taken that experience back in as an employee. So nothing lost, but I had to make a fundamental change in my life, in my earning power, and trying to explain to people why I was doing it, just because I couldn't be in the office 5 days a week.
Just imagine how many people feel like that, right? Even now, and we wonder why. Well, I think one of the data points that was brought up in our workshop today was that, I think it was saying like 40% of people are considering leaving their job right now. I think and many of them, it's because they're having to choose work or family. So you're telling me, Chris,
yes.
I've been working remote.
I find it quite interesting that who was it who released this data? I just read it yesterday. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but engagement levels are actually lower now than they were in 2020. I think in 2020 we were all kind of in it together, and we were just, we were surviving together. There was this kind of bunker mentality, and now we've come out of it, hopefully, properly. And now people are questioning, what am I doing with my life? People are sort of thinking, I want to make a fundamental change. And I'm hearing it from people who are saying, where's my career path? I'm thinking of moving out of London. How do you feel about that? So a lot of these conversations are happening, but a lot of people are moving jobs because they're trying to find that, what else is out there, which it normally does happen after a big stress episode. So when people go through a massive, life-changing event like COVID, where we all went into lockdown, and nothing felt the same at all, it was all very alien, people do start questioning their choices in their life.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think that is why we've got a mass resignation going on at the moment in both the United States and United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm. You're right, and I think it's only going to increase, because you raise a really interesting perspective. I didn't look at it like that. You're right. During that time, there was just a sense of togetherness because we're all going through this. So that's why we saw engagement probably go up. But now, as you say, as we're sort of tailing off, people are actually going, is this really where I want to be? Is this aligned with my purpose, my values, my work life? So that's a really interesting point. I didn't really think about that you made there. One of the other observations I saw, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is in the same way, I've never seen so many people leave the HR profession during this time. Keeping in mind, I'm speaking to chief people officers every day, and off camera, obviously I can't share all of those stories on the podcast. I'm hearing, I've been doing this for 15 years. Every week I was getting an email, multiple emails saying, Chris, just wanted to let you know I'm leaving my role. Do you know any other opportunities that are out there? Please let me know. Or I'm just retiring early. Actually, so many of the leaders that I spoke to just retired early. I'd love to hear your thoughts on
well, I think probably, as I said to you, we've had a certain role, a certain part of the business that we looked after, and then COVID threw that all up in the air, and we were expected to come up with all the answers. So we were expected to come up with policies on COVID safety. So we were going into the realm of healthcare, and then we were dealing with mental health. And to be honest, I think it's very difficult to support people with mental health challenges if you yourself are not feeling strong. And I know that quite a few people were dealing with that. They also felt challenged, but there was no one for them to go to.
Yeah, who does HR turn to, right?
Well, that's where you have to ensure that your company has a really good health plan in place. And I know it costs money, and there are a lot of companies out there who don't have private medical, but you'll find that most of the big companies, AXA, Bupa, Vitality, they all have very good mental health plans in place now. And I think that it's a false economy not to have something in place so that your staff and you yourself can go, or indeed a employee assistance program, an EAP program, because HR needs someone to talk to as well. We've got to look after ourselves. It's like the aeroplane analogy. You have to put on the oxygen mask yourself, but on yourself first before you put it on your child, because if you run out of oxygen, you can't look after the person next to you. So I think that between changes in what's expected of us, incredible pressures on us, suddenly, our working days got very long. Sometimes I would finish my working day at 1 o'clock in the morning because I just had so much to do. I had policies to write. I had to make sure everyone was okay globally. I had to keep,
especially with a global team, right? A global team is just, you're never turning off, basically.
No, and I do know how to look after myself.
What are some of the things? Sorry to interrupt you. What are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself and your team? Some practical things.
Well, with my team, I'm always available. So if someone says, "Can I talk to you?" I drop everything and I talk to them, because I think when someone says, "Can I talk to you?" it's usually something really important. It's not, "What shall I have for dinner?" I always we checked in with each other on a pretty regular basis. At first it was daily, and then it was 3 times a week, and now it's probably about 3 times a week at the moment as well.
But are those just checking in non-business related, just like how are you? When you say check in, you mean?
I think, to be perfectly honest, when I check in with the team, I think that probably the first 10-15 minutes is how are you. It's something that I believe is an incredibly important question. So how are you? And then you listen for the answer. So you actively listen to what the answer is. And then if you're not really sure about the answer, so when somebody says, oh, I'm fine, everything's fine, you know, those answers, you have to say, no, really, how are you?
How are you really, right? Yeah.
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 So that's pretty important, but also just, you know, you've got too much on your plate, you know, let's just push that to next week, you know, giving people, I think, probably the opportunity to perhaps miss a deadline, because unless we're working for, you know, people who are trying to cure cancer, it's okay. It can wait until next week.
Yeah. And sometimes it's good as a leader there was a time a few months ago where I had a couple of shows and I was feeling really overwhelmed and anxious. And I just had to say to the team, I need to go home. I'm just not feeling great. I'm feeling really overwhelmed and anxious. And it's okay. And I wanted, one, I felt like that way, but two, I also wanted to let them know that it's also okay.
I think showing your own vulnerability, letting people know that you yourself might be feeling exhausted or tired or a bit fed up, just being really honest, so that they can see that you're human as well. And I mean, that's all part of this. I mean, I'm reading more and more about it, and I'm being a bit of a champion of sort of human-centered leadership, which is about really putting, you know, the human at the center of everything that we do, and also just trusting people to support the business and drive the business forward, as opposed to trusting the numbers, trusting the financials. Because people are, if you trust people and you give them the right tools and resources and the confidence to do well, then they're engaged and motivated and they want to go forward and do well, and then that will, in itself, will drive the number forward.
Yeah.
So and part of human-centered leadership is about showing your own vulnerabilities. So I'm, you know, absolutely fine going, I don't feel great today, or I feel really tired, or I had COVID a couple of weeks ago and I've got this sort of long standing cough and it's really annoying. So I'm sorry if I cough in this interview, but literally yesterday I said to the team, oh, I just feel so awful. I just can't, you know, I can't shake it. I feel terrible. I'm so looking forward to Easter, and, you know, just showing that vulnerability is really important.
It's interesting that you say that, because again, that was something that came up in the conversation amongst the CHROs today during the workshop I did. It constantly kept coming up, that the importance of, you know, leading with empathy or human-centered leadership, and half the group was saying, well, this is normal, surely everyone knows how to do this, and we should, and the other, and I was on the other side of saying, no, we do need to provide our leaders and employees and managers with common language, with the skills, the toolkit to be able to have these type of conversations, because in many companies, they've never done that. They've never sat down and spoke to an employee about their mental health.
Let's remember, we British are very good at, you know, I mean, it's probably only within the last 10 years that we've admitted that we need to have therapy, etc. I mean, I think everyone should have a therapist. I think it's probably the best thing you can do. I mean, I'm slightly biased because my sister is a therapist, but she's a therapist in California. But, you know, I think that it's really important to be able to have an outlet, whether it be someone that you pay or someone that you trust, because things do build up and they magnify. So what we have to do is we have to demagnify problems and be able to look at them logically and have a plan as well. I mean, this is why those happiness journals are such big sellers. So the happiness journal is where every day you make a plan, 3 things that you're going to achieve. You know, what's the weather like? What are you eating? It's a very logical way. And
or 3 things you're grateful for today.
Absolutely. What you're grateful for, what you wake up, what you're grateful for, what you go to bed, you say that you're grateful for. And scientists have, you know, there's a lot of data behind actually handwriting this, makes you, it sort of imprints on your brain, and you can really change how you feel if you fill these journals out. And that is why they're bestsellers, because they work. And so, this is why, the mental health is now top of everyone's, important topics, I would say, particularly in HR. And that leads to why human-centered leadership is so critically important right now, because I think we've all realized that everything's a little bit fragile. We're fragile. The economy is fragile. The world is. I mean, a war broke out just a month or so ago, and it's had huge repercussions. So everything is moving plates. Nothing is particularly secure. And we have to, we need to look after ourselves and each other. And I think that's why this way of sort of leading is critically important right now.
I agree, definitely. And again, you mentioned the war. Again, it's like another thing. HR is just, in particular, it's just expected us to step up to the plate.
Yeah.
and have the answers. I was speaking to Microsoft's executive team recently, and I was like, we just come out of a meeting with the team about how we're now going to address the war in Russia and Ukraine. And it's like, Chris, I never thought I'd be having these conversations.
No.
That I'm now leading a task. The individual was leading two task force, the COVID task force, and now this other task force. I don't know, the name or how they named it. But I was like,
the war task force.
Yeah, but this is what I mean, right? Like, these are you don't learn that.
Yeah.
You don't learn those things in your CIPD course.
Well, I mean, there's not much that, if I recall my CIPD course, that I'm using now, to be perfectly brutally honest. But I mean, we have what we called a COVID meeting twice a week on a Monday and a Thursday. We've been having that since lockdown, essentially, and it's now a COVID and a war meeting. So we get an update on COVID globally, and of course, quite interesting because China's been in a good place and now it's not in a good place.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the riots in Shanghai.
It's gone full 360, right? Because in the beginning they were like, we're fine, got it under control. We're now 2 years later.
Zero COVID.
Zero COVID. Yeah, 2 years later, it's kind of gone round. Yeah.
No, and now we also discuss, because obviously we're a global business. We did quite a lot of business in Russia, and we had to make some really tough decisions about business. But I think that from my HR network, I would say that pretty much every company that I know of has sort of pulled out doing direct business with Russia.
Yeah.
So yes, we meet twice a week and we talk about these two things. And I never thought that I would have a pandemic and a war added to my job description. But you have to be flexible and adaptable.
And also you're just expected to step up, right?
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yeah. Who'd have thought I'd be watching so much of the news?
and that's the thing, it's ever changing. One of the biggest skills that came up during the conversation today as well was about how HR or leadership teams and people like yourself have had to become master communicators as well, right? Your skill, that's a skill set in itself.
How presentation skills.
Or how do you address? Because in the beginning, I think we were overwhelming employees with so much information. Like every day, there was just constant, stuff being thrown at everyone, and maybe a percentage of it is related to you individually. Because if you have a global business, and now we're creating more tailored communication to each individual employee. Obviously, technology does play a part in that as well, but you're constantly having to keep up with global events and what's happening and it changing every single day, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, we had a lot of communication during lockdown, and it was very well received because people were hungry for information because they were locked in their homes. And then we've curated that for this year, and we have much more tailored information going out on a daily basis to our intranet. but it's much more curated and shorter, snappier. We asked for feedback, and this is what people wanted now.
Is that still through Glint as well?
We did do it through Glint, but we also did it through asking managers to ask their teams. So we did it qualitatively and then quantitatively through Glint. Yeah.
You mentioned that question just randomly. I like that. Anything else? Were there any surprises that you got?
To be honest, I'm never surprised when I go through the results. And actually, today, when I just told you about the power cut here in North London, I was presenting the results for our Q1 Glint survey, and honestly, there are never any surprises. I think that is good because it means that I'm getting that feedback from the team and also from managers and directly from staff as well about how things are. So
what were some of those things though? What were some of those other anything else comments? I'm just interested to know that people.
Well, obviously this one had a lot of comments with regards to the cost of living.
Ah, of course.
So people are very concerned about the cost of living, about their energy bills, and we were able to give pay increases and also pay our bonus. And now it almost feels as though that's been wiped out.
Ah, because that extra £3,000, I think it's on. Is that what it is? I think it's an average of £3,000 extra per family home.
Yes, I mean it's impacted mainly people who are owner occupiers, because most people who are renting
don't have to pay. It's included.
The heating bill's part of their rental.
Mm-hmm.
However, one person had a rental change. They renewed their lease last month and they had a 12% increase in their rent.
Again, just another thing that we're talking about. Now you're actually having to help employees with the energy crisis.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a platform that offers discounts, in stores and things like that. And I did an email just outlining what discounts you can get. You can get 5% at Tesco's and 6% at Sainsbury's, etc. Yada yada. But again, I never thought that I'd be supporting people with their financial wellness, which actually is probably another key topic right now for HR, is supporting people with financial wellness, mental health, financial wellness, and just, and also their learning and development. A lot of people, learning development, I think, is really high on people's list right now, because it's also, what are you going to do for me now we've come out of the pandemic?
Yeah.
So how are you going to support me with my growth? I feel as though I was stagnant for 2 years and now we're out of it. What are you going to do for me?
Yeah, because that was on the back burner, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, I had a zero training budget and zero time to do anything myself.
Even if you wanted to.
For anyone.
Yeah.
But now we have to, and I think also the world of HR, we have to be quite adept at putting together learning and development plans ourselves, because having a learning and development department is, something that probably is for much bigger companies. Mm-hmm. So we are true generalists in sort of turning our hand to everything.
Nice. Yeah. Is that something you enjoy though, being more hands-on? Because, as a CPO in a larger organization, a lot of those things you're delegating. Do you enjoy that?
I do. I'm a very happy generalist. Mm. I always have been. And, when I was consulting, somebody would phone up and say, I need this. And I go, that's fine. So I would, throughout my career, I've turned my hand to everything, including running training programs, writing the training program and then running it as well. And I do like it. Because I like actual contact with employees. I think it's really important for me to be able to talk to employees directly and hear exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
When I worked at Moving Picture Company, there were 1,000 people in the London office. So I obviously couldn't speak to 1,000 people, but I did have very regular, catch-ups with managers by sort of walking the block and catching up with them on a daily basis. And that's how I stayed in contact with, what was going on the ground.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because it's not always the case. I spoke to, you know, many CPOs who go from very large organizations to small organizations where they kind of have to be more generous and hands-on, and they really struggle.
Yeah.
They really, and they say to me, Chris, like when I asked, you know, what was the biggest, you know, challenge of joining a startup or, you know, or small to medium-sized business, and they're like having to be involved in all of those areas that you just outlined. So it's not for everyone to be able to do that.
You know, it's a very different role, you know, when you have to do payroll, you know, do all the contracts, right, you know, make sure all the contracts are up to date, write the policies, write learning and development. I mean, this is real generalist hands-on. I would say that probably the majority of the HR community is doing that. I mean, I think that there are very few people who are in the roles where they have a very tailored job description that is just managing all the departments.
Mm-hmm. On that point then, something you mentioned to me before is, and it kind of, I suppose, is reflected in your own title about the need for HR to have a kind of a refresh, a rebrand. You know, we're seeing now Chief People Officer, Chief People and Culture Officer in your case. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, you know, I don't know if you remember, but there was an article, probably, I think it was in 2004. I was working for an agency called agency.com that's now part of TBWA, but my boss in the States sent me an article that said why we hate HR. And I read that article and I thought to myself, you know, I never, ever want to be the brunt of this kind of article and joke ever again. You know, I just don't want to be part of this discipline. And there's no point sitting and moaning. I'm just going to have to actively do something about it. So I think that this, you know, we have as a discipline evolved from the, you know, wheel in HR, here comes HR,
the policy,
you know,
police
human remains, you know, the personnel department. And I think we've evolved beautifully into a discipline that is about, you know, really looking after people, supporting companies and supporting, you know, businesses with their plans, their people plans integrated into the business strategy, which is incredibly important. So I think we should be very pleased with the fact that we have managed to evolve ourselves a little bit because of, you know, we've done this by design, but also because of the nature of the world and what's happened. And that's why, you know, I was saying to you earlier, I think that, you know, it's caused a lot of strain for people, COVID, the pandemic, and then all the changes now and the different way of working. And I think that for a lot of people, it was too noisy, it was too much. And I hope those people come back into the profession, because the people who are leaving have got incredible experience, and it would be great to, you know, welcome them back in. But maybe they didn't get the support they really needed at the time. That's why they had no option but to leave, and that's really sad.
And to that point, I should have said that earlier, that was one of the reasons, because obviously I asked, why are you leaving? And most of the responses was they just didn't feel like they had the support.
And that's really incredibly sad that it's a little bit like, you know, people in the NHS really, you know, now the NHS are really reaching out and giving key workers support, because you can't expect someone to give and not collapse. Either they have to have a really good support network at home, or they have to really know themselves incredibly well to know how to look after themselves, or they've got to be able to talk to somebody, and which is why I think, you know, everyone should have a therapist.
Yeah, love it. No, definitely. Well, listen, before I let you go, I want to jump into our quick fire round. So I'm going to ask you some questions, but you've only got 30 seconds per question.
Okay. All right. I'll focus.
Are you ready?
I'm focused.
What are your hobbies and passions outside of the office? What are your top hobbies and passions outside of the office?
Theatre, film, books.
Oh, love it. Oh, I can tell by the background with the books.
Yeah.
Amazing. Favorite theatre show? Do you have one?
Well, I would probably say Anything Goes musical, and just recently I went to the National and I saw Small Island, which is by Andrea Levy, and if If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, but you have to go and see it.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
Well, there we go. How would your family and friends describe what you do for a living?
I asked my stepmother, what do you think I do? And she said, sift CVs. So I sift CVs.
Yeah, even now. But don't worry about the technology. I still go for every one of them.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry about my title. I just sift CVs.
It's funny, right? If you could sort of click your fingers and change one thing about HR, what would you change?
I would change our study program to include financial acumen and global international relations.
Amazing. Oh yeah, I think everyone knows why you said that. So as well. What legacy do you want to leave behind for your family?
For my family?
Yeah.
Street awareness for my daughter, who is now 19. She's pretty street awareness, and financial acumen, and the ability to be agile and change, because it's a movable feast. Nothing that you plan actually happens.
Mm-hmm. My next question I normally ask is, have you ever considered quitting HR? If so, why? But you kind of said that earlier, which you did, right? and so maybe I'm going to change that question and say, if you wasn't doing HR, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, I think probably I would be something in business. Probably I would like to go and work for a startup, probably as a chief operating officer, something like that. Yeah.
Nice. You're still going to be ingrained in the business, right? In every facet.
Yeah, I mean, I really do love business and how it functions, and I do love working with people. So I would have to keep those elements, but probably in operations, chief operating officer would be interesting.
Nice. What would you say is the biggest investment you've made in yourself, in your career?
In myself,
yeah.
Probably my master's. And actually after my master's, I went and did a 1-year postgrad course in coaching at Birkbeck, and I just loved every minute of it. And I now would really be interested in doing a master's in coaching.
Was that a master's in HR or master's in business? Or?
First of all, I did a master's in HR.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and my professor wanted me to carry on and do a doctorate, but I said, I just don't think that that's the road I want to go down. Yeah. So I gave it a couple of years rest, and then I went to Birkbeck and I did my 1 year in coaching.
Nice.
So yeah.
Who would you say is the one person in your career that's had the biggest impact on you?
Easily, probably one of my first bosses, not an HR boss, he was a CEO. The reason why is he's a self-made entrepreneur, and he writes all his ideas on the back of an envelope, literally on the train coming up from Sussex. He says more in one sentence than most people say in a paragraph. And he had the best bit of advice for me when I was starting out, which was, stop bringing me problems and start bringing me the problem with the solution, Stephanie. Now go away.
I literally had the same experience, by the way. I remember going to the office of my MD at the time, complaining about all these things, and I never forget it. She was like, Chris, never come in my office ever again without solutions, or at least a suggestion of a solution, of just problems. And I never forgot that. Can we give the gentleman a shout out? Can you share his name?
Yes, Scott Clark. Yeah,
amazing.
He created a company called CPR, and it was bought by Fleischmann Hillard. And then he created another company, and it was bought. So he is a true entrepreneur. He also taught me the value of walking meetings. So he would say, walk with me, Stephanie. And we walk to Starbucks, get the coffee and come back again. And I'd had 15 minutes meeting with him, which just was, perfect.
Amazing. Love that. Love that. And then last question, what's one piece of advice would you give to the HR leaders of tomorrow that are coming into the workplace right now in this type of environment? Yeah,
I would say learn to actively listen. And I think it's probably a skill set that a lot of people find difficult. So actively listening is listening and not thinking about the chicken dinner or the list that you've got to make or the email you've got to write, but actually listening to what the person is saying, not thinking of the answer, just listening. So learn to actively listen, and also learn to be really adaptable and not to be a job's worth.
Yeah. One other question that just randomly came to mind. I've never asked anyone this before, but what are the things that HR leaders aren't talking about that they should be?
Gosh, that's really interesting. I think probably HR leaders are not talking about the fact that we are learning on the job. And I think that that's, whilst it's good to be adaptable and learn as you go along, it does show that we probably haven't had that foundation of learning from the start. I think that's why I mentioned that probably CIPD or any kind of HR certificate needs to have elements in it that will prepare us better. So international relations, financial acumen, and also maybe presentation skills, leadership skills, because we were not fully prepared. We've had to learn that. And a lot of people have done it really, really well, but it would have been nice to be prepared early on in our careers.
Yeah. Or the idea that learning ends when you complete a master's in itself, right?
I don't really understand why we're not required to put forward our, continual professional development points, because I always do something every single year, and I read books, as you can see. But I constantly feel I don't know enough and that I need to know more, and I've got to find out. So, and I think everyone should, take heed, because it's changing. Everything's changing.
Do you still think it's worth it in this day and age for someone to go through CIPD and that sort of traditional path, or really the experience of jumping in the deep end?
Because it shows that you're serious, and there are definitely elements of CIPD that are really important. I just think there needs to be more to it. So I'm talking about more modules, particularly financial acumen. I'm kind of surprised that there are a lot of people in HR who still don't really know how to use Excel. They can't read a P&L. All these points that are critically important. We hold budgets. We should have these skills. So, yeah.
Well, I love that. I'm glad I asked that question now. Sorry, I just threw that on you out of nowhere. Because I just feel like there's that sort of undertone of unspoken things. And I think you addressed one of those, which I've done, 500 plus episodes, and no one's ever mentioned that before. So I think maybe I should start asking that question more often to everyone. But honestly, thanks so much for joining me on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So just so I know, we still can get a hard copy of the book. That exists.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that. I feel like I want to get one as well. For Robin. I know she's 3 years old, but I feel like I want to introduce it to her and have something tangible where we can talk about.
Well, I've seen the pages for the 2023 book, and we're going into space, so there's going to be a real focus on space. And I just think for kids of your daughter's age for today, they will be going into space.
Yeah.
In their lifetime, they will be living on Mars, and I think that's just incredible.
Do you know what's funny? Yeah, you'll enjoy this. Robin asked me when I picked her up from nursery the other day. She asked me if she could visit Planet Bong, which is basically. Do you know what she's referring to? If anyone who's parents right now know exactly what I'm referring to from the cartoon, and she's like, "Can we go visit Planet Bong?" She just thinks that we actually have space travel right now. I just love a 3-year-old's mindset of. Where do you want to go this weekend to space?
But that is going to be in her lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
She will be able to go into space for the weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously not to Mars, but she will be able to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And that, when you think about it, isn't that incredible?
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, let's do this again soon. I'd love to see you in person someday as well. We're not too far away from each other as well, but let's stay in contact, and I wish you all the best until we next chat.
Yeah, that sounds good. You take care.
Thanks.